Hey, what's up, guys? Hey, it's another episode in my sort of Talk to the Camera series. What we're going to talk about here today is what Wizards of the Coast could learn from the APBA Game Company. So I've talked about this a little bit before in the past. It's not so clear exactly what happened, but we do know that the APBA Game Company, probably starting sometime in the 1970s, started to overproduce cards. And we're talking about overproducing to this massive, massive extent, to the point where, you know, you could still buy cards usually from the early 70s, even as far back as the late 60s, without necessarily paying even over $100 for it. Amazing for something that's over 50 years old, right? There's a lot of supply out there, and maybe not necessarily that much demand. I mean, how many people play APBA today? That does make a difference, I know. The reason why I bring this up, though, is because, so Magic the Gathering, if you haven't played it, I know that my viewership might skew a little bit old. If you've never played Magic the Gathering, it's a card game that came around back in 93, I want to say 92, 93 or so. That's heavy on sort of fantasy type settings in which you play against an opponent. You knock the opponent's life total down, and there's all sorts of cool things and shenanigans you can do. The rule book, at least the way it originally was quite open. It's become a little bit less open as time has gone on and as they've had a semblance of what it is they're supposed to do. Now, the interesting thing is that Magic the Gathering cards are collectible, much more so than APBA or Strat-O-Matic cards. Magic the Gathering cards are so collectible that you see huge amounts of cards being sold or being traded online, and you can follow them the way that you would follow, normal stocks. In fact, there are some people who try to invest in them that way, but if you've ever done collecting before, like baseball cards or other sports memorabilia, you might know that your chance of making good profit in doing so is maybe not as high as you would think. Now, the interesting thing is when you go follow the Magic the Gathering financial community, the people who talk about this stuff, you see the same thing written by people over and over again. Well, maybe this isn't such a great short-term investment, but I like it in the long term because no matter what happens, you can always play with the cards, right? Even if my, my Mox cards or my Black Lotus or whatever goes down to a very, very low price, it doesn't matter to me because I can still use them when I play the game with somebody else, right? This is this idea that I see coming up time and time again that collectible card game pieces are better than traditional sports cards because they have some sort of utility outside of just being something that you can put up on the mantle or some desirable piece of cardboard that some other person might want to have. Now, the reason why I bring this up is because that is not a true argument. And I know that it's not a true argument because of my experience with APBA cards, right? The truth is that you might find yourself in a position in which you don't want to play the game anymore. And if that happens to a lot of people, you will see the price of the product go down, and it will go down very, very significantly, even for cards that are extremely rare. I would argue that when we saw original 52 and 53 APBA seasons going for like less than $5,000 each, far less than $5,000 each, we are seeing the signs of this happening. I mean, 1950, wasn't it 52 or a 53 APBA set is extraordinarily rare to find. I mean, we're talking about like original envelopes. We're talking about cards that look kind of nice, haven't been, completely destroyed and stuff like that. Not so easy to find. You're not going to find a whole bunch of those sitting around. The reason why the price goes down is in part because there's not quite as much demand to play the game. It's in part because a lot of cards for these seasons have been printed, right? If you look back in the 1970s in the APBA Journal, you'll see that, the popularity of or the price of used cards from that era in the 50s and so on was very, very high. Part of the reason why is because if you wanted to play with a 1950 season, you had no other choice unless you wanted to make your own cards, right? So there's, alternatives. There are more games around today, right? There are alternatives today to playing with cards and dice on a table, just like I do here. You can play using computer programs. Some of the alternative games are more realistic. Realistic, of course, I mean, we have to put that in quotes, but there's a lot of sort of development that has taken place, and though APBA does its best to keep up, in a certain manner of thinking, it hasn't really kept up that well with all of the trends, right? And so it's something to sort of keep in mind. It's possible that popularity has gone down because there are much better, much truer, and much more attractive substitute products out there that might be a little bit better looking than blowing a few grand on an original like 1953 APBA baseball set, right? So something to keep in mind is that, even though you think it might be a big and safe investment because it looks so big today, that doesn't mean that necessarily your investment is going to actually be big and actually be substantive and substantial looking into the future. it really is something to worry about. I would say that you have to really kind of have your pulse and your fingers on what is happening, what is popular. So today, right now, though people in Magic the Gathering will complain a little bit and say, oh, well, the older cards, the vintage cards and stuff, the demand has gone down and the prices have been shrinking, right? The real reason for that, as everybody knows, is this Lord of the Rings set that just came out that has completely, dominated people's attention and has a whole bunch of like chase cards and stuff, the sort of stuff we definitely don't see in baseball simulations, right? Who cares about a chase card? You just want to play the game, right? But because of that, there is an argument to be made that now is a good time to go buy into older cards. There's another good argument to be made that, well, maybe these older cards won't be as valuable anymore, and maybe we are living in the golden age now. I don't know. All I know is that Magic the Gathering right now, as of today, is a lot more popular than it ever was in the past. Certainly is more popular than when I was in middle school playing this game, and is more popular by far than APBA ever was. I mean, they used to talk in the APBA Journal about how there were over 10,000 people who read it, and we could all form our own small city. With Magic, you have multiple millions of players worldwide. It's a little bit different circumstance, but that does not mean that these laws of supply and demand do not apply. If Wizards of the Coast were to get very, very happy and say, we're going to keep growing into infinity, right? The numbers will never go down. They will always go up, right? If you've seen that video, line go up, that's the way that they talked about cryptocurrency and NFTs not too long ago. If that is what the mindset is, that is what I would call the Seitsian mindset. This is this idea that J. Richard Seitz had that through the 70s and 80s, he was going to continue to experience the same level of growth, even though it's not really what was happening, right? He was not experiencing quite that level of growth. In fact, as many people in sabermetrics will testify to, and will admit, a lot of younger people who were playing these simulation games back in the late 70s and the early 80s, and especially the mid 80s, were playing Strat-O-Matic, not playing APBA. And part of that was because, you have lefty-righty splits, but part of that was also that there was this aura of accuracy, right? This game actually uses 3 dice instead of 2, and the Master game is not quite as convoluted, right? The advanced Strat-O-Matic game was a lot easier, a lot faster to play, a little bit more intuitive, and so on and so forth, right? I don't know exactly what happened to J. Richard Seitz. I don't know why he decided to increase print runs the way that he did. But I do know that when we look at Wizards of the Coast today and some of its strategies, we see things that are similar, and this is something to watch out for, right? If you were living in the late 70s and you were buying APBA cards and you're thinking, forget about doing traditional investments, I'm going to buy something that I love, and I'm going to put a bunch of money in this, you were a sucker and you got hosed, right? If you wanted to buy something that you loved and have it go up in time or up over time, you should have put your money in really nice looking, Topps cards from the 1950s. That would have increased a lot over time and would remain high today. Given what the actual circumstances were surrounding baseball card collecting, though, the chances of you successfully doing that are very, very low, because those old card shows were mostly about big dealers coming around and buying up everybody's collections, having them go out into the attic and getting them and paying a little bit over the asking price at the time, planning on trying to do a little bit of a trick. There's a lot of interesting things that go on there, and baseball cards in particular are very, very sketchy for this type of thing. You think it's sketchy for guys to buy up, all of the existing amounts of, whatever APBA set, and then have it bleed out slowly over eBay over time and maybe get a sale here or there. If you think that's sketchy, you really need to read up on what these guys were doing with baseball cards in the 70s and even the early 80s. And that doesn't even count going into stuff like little alters they would make and trying to, paint over different patches or trying to iron it out so that the crease isn't there anymore or whatever. Yeah, there's a lot of sketchy stuff going on there. Basically, though, the reason why I bring this up as a comparison is because if you're into Magic the Gathering today and you're thinking, oh, I need to go invest in this stuff, I want to go buy sealed boxes, or I want to go buy certain singles, or I want to get a whole bunch of packs and then open them and look for the big hitter cards and then just sit on them, be careful. Be very, very careful. Because if you went after APBA in 1977 and bought like 10 copies of the 77 APBA set and then sat on it until 2023 and then tried to sell it, you would be very, very disappointed. You would say, this set costs, like $15 or something new. Congratulations, you can sell it now for maybe like 30 if you're lucky before eBay and shipping fees, right? Not so great. Something to keep in mind, right? Wizards of the Coast as a company needs to pay attention to this. APBA had a really, really hard time of things in the late 80s and the early 90s, in part because of the bad perception of having a whole bunch of unsold products sitting around that couldn't sell, that was on sale every single time the catalog came out. That is a place that you don't want to be in if you're one of these companies. I know Wizard of the Coast doesn't feel necessarily that pain itself today because it's not selling directly to market if we ignore Amazon, but you don't want to have it be the case where dealers where the middlemen who supply cards over to the stores, the distributors, have oodles and oodles of product that simply has not sold. That is not the place you want to be in. You never want to have it so that your new product ends up having to be sold at a discount or having to be dumped off somewhere, because it's really bad for the optics of your game, and it will make your competitors look a lot better. So there's a little bit of my advice. If I were working at Wizard of the Coast today, if I were in charge of this sort of thing, I would really recommend that you be very, very careful about print runs. You have a great product and it's a hit, that's great. What they should do, and what I think they've been doing to an extent, is you should be fiddling around with the price and trying to get as much of that demand as possible in the price of the good itself instead of increasing the print run. That's what you want to do. You want to make sure that you have something that people want to buy and pay for. And as an extension of this, and this is the end of the video, when you look at Strat-O-Matic Black, which I think is actually a good idea and which kind of looks cool, I think it's a great idea. I think that APBA really should look into doing something like that, create some sort of premium set, have something with gold numbers or some stupid thing like that. The reason why is because you want something different so that people who are whales, people who are big buyers, will want to buy that product and spend a little bit more money with you, right? And that way you can stay away from accidentally overprinting things and ending up shooting yourself in the foot in 10 years. There goes my opinion on that, and love to know what you think down in the comments. Let me know. Bye-bye.